For months now, if not years, you guys have been screaming at me to pick up a Casio Oceanus because you know how much I appreciate beautifully finished watches, and some of these watches seem to offer good value for money and they're styling as well. I think these watches are going to be right up my alley, so I've taken your advice. I've bought my first Casio Oceanus. Was I right to take your advice? Let's find out. Well, I think I was, but, and it's a pretty big but, only because I bought the cheapest and, in my honest opinion, the best looking one. If you go onto the Sakura Watches website and have a look at all the Oceanus watches available, most of them, well, don't look anything like as good as the one that I've bought, and they're all far more expensive as well. So, yes, I do think some of them offer good value for money, and some of them, not many, some of them look really, really good. The vast majority though, they don't look good at all and they're just way too expensive. But of course, having said that, the one that I've picked up, and I do think it is the cheapest one available, is fantastic looking. It looks incredible and there's no denying the finishing on this watch is sensational. It's not up there with Grand Seiko watches, but it's not a million miles away, and this watch is way off Grand Seiko prices. And of course, with it being a Casio, it's got some cool features as well. It's got Bluetooth, so you can connect it to your phone so that it keeps updated, and that's going to be particularly useful if you're not in an area that picks up the radio signal. So yeah, it has radio controlled functionality to it as well, so it will connect to radio towers around the world and stay accurate using those. It's solar powered, so you don't need to mess around changing batteries every couple of years and potentially compromising the water resistance capabilities. It's also got a built-in perpetual calendar, which is good until the year 2100. And the lume on this thing is really impressive. I've tested the lume on other Casio watches, and yeah, this has to be the best lume on any Casio watch I have ever seen. Sapphire crystal as well with AR coating. The steel finishing is unbelievable. The dial has these really, really cool applied indices, although they're not applied to the dial, they're applied to the chapter ring. And they hover above the dial, which is really, really cool. There's a sort of sunburst effect. It isn't an actual sunburst effect, it's sort of concentric circles, but they do a similar thing to sunburst dials. You get this sort of light play. It's quite subtle, but I like it. I like the colour as well. It's a sort of dark blue. I think this is the most popular version. Although I have seen a very nice pale sort of baby or duck egg blue version, which is nice. But yeah, for sure, this is definitely the one to pick up, and on this stainless steel bracelet as well. Oh, and it's got a summertime and a wintertime function as well, so you can advance the time an hour and move it back an hour whenever you need to. And it's got a low power indicator as well, which is fairly standard these days, I know. The second hand just jumps 2 seconds every 2 seconds instead of moving in the normal fashion, sort of 1 second every 1 second. Oh, and I forgot to mention the second hand is bang on the markers. It literally couldn't be on those markers anymore, and gravity doesn't seem to impact it, so it doesn't seem to matter which way you hold this watch. Yeah, the second hand lands on the markers every time. Of course, if you don't want to use Bluetooth and connect it to your smartphone and you can't receive the radio signals from those radio towers, you can adjust the time manually. And if you're in a hospital or an aircraft, you can disable that Bluetooth functionality temporarily so as not to impact any equipment in the hospital or potentially, well, the aeroplane. Is that still a thing? I don't know. Maybe it is. You can also adjust the accuracy of the hands. So yeah, if any of them aren't hitting the markers for whatever reason, maybe the watch has taken a bit of a bump, maybe it's been impacted by some sort of magnetic field, you can adjust the hands to make them, yeah, hit the markers basically. And if you do end up finding yourself on an aeroplane flying to a different time zone, you can adjust the time on this watch without impacting the accuracy. So yeah, it's not really a GMT because you can't see 2 time zones at once, but this function just makes traveling a little easier. Oh, and I forgot to mention the power saving mode as well. If you leave this watch in the dark between 10 PM and 5:30 AM, I think it is, the second hand will stop and the watch will have entered level 1 power saving mode. And if the watch is left in level 1 power saving mode for 7 days, it will go into level 2 power saving mode, where the hands will stop completely, preserving as much energy as possible. And then when you need the watch again, just pick it up, put it in the daylight, fiddle with the crown or whatever, and the hands will go back to the correct position. Now this all sounds wonderful, but this watch isn't without its weaknesses. And the first one for me was the clasp. And it reminds me of the sort of clasps you see on super cheap AliExpress watches. Not the inner elements, they're milled and they look and feel absolutely fine. But the outer shell has got these two sort of flimsy buttons on the side. And to me, it just looks and feels a bit cheap. Now, I'm sure you've noticed there's only 2 micro adjustment levels on the outer shell, but they do give you smaller or half links as well. So you should be able to get the perfect fit with this watch, despite there only being those 2 adjustment levels on the clasp. The bracelet links are also held together with a pin and collar system. These pins, they're not too difficult to pull out and put back in, but just generally, it's probably my least favourite method. I prefer screw pins, and actually I probably prefer split pins after that, to be honest, because there's no additional collar that you end up dropping and then getting on your hands and knees to find. Yeah, I just find pin and collar a little bit fiddly, but there's no denying the bracelet is incredible, beautifully finished. This one's a little bit picky. In fact, I think probably all the negatives are a little bit picky. You can see the solar cell under the dial in certain lighting conditions. That's not unusual, to be honest. I shouldn't have probably even mentioned that one. This one I'm definitely going to mention though. The dial is a beautiful colour, very sort of strong, deep blue colour. And then you've got the sapphire crystal and looks like a blue AR coating. And those two things combined means the light play that you see on the crystal is just very blue. I don't know why. For some reason, I just don't like it very much. I think it just cheapens the look a little bit. Again, quite picky that one, and it's sort of a personal one. Snap-on case back as well. I think it would have been nicer to have seen a screw-down case back, but then you don't really need to go into this watch at all. And if you do, you're probably better off taking it to a service centre to have the capacitor changed. So again, a really minor one, I think. It's still rated as a 100 meter water resistant watch, so you shouldn't have any issues swimming with this watch and even potentially doing a little bit of shallow diving, despite the crown as well just being a pull push crown. You know what, I think that's probably about it. I think the only other grumble I could have is that these are JDM watches and they're not that easy to pick up. You have to import them from Japan or abroad at least. I've had to buy this one from eBay. It's in mint condition. The previous owner bought it and thought it was just too big for them, so they've posted it on eBay and I've picked it up for a little bit less than what I would have paid if I'd have imported it myself and then paid import taxes. But yeah, it just would be nice to be able to pick up these watches locally, if that makes sense. Not necessarily from a jeweller's on a high street, but just from local websites. And why do they have to make the expensive ones so ugly? Normally, the more expensive watches in a range or from a brand of watches are supposed to look nicer, but Casio have got it the other way around. Their cheapest one, I think, is the best looking one, and their more expensive ones just look horrible. Anyway, there's no denying this is a sensational watch, I have to say. The finishing has really impressed me. The functionality is pretty good as well. I love the way this thing looks and feels on my wrist. It feels really comfortable. The weaknesses, I think, are all fairly minor. The price is good as well. I've picked this up for £295 in the UK. It's basically the same money I paid for that SBTM Seiko I showed you guys recently. A very similar watch actually, and I might do a little comparison between these two. So let me know if that's something you're interested in. If I had to pick between those two, which one would I go for? I actually don't know. I really like the strong angles and sharp corners on the case on this Casio, but then I just like the overall look of the Seiko, and I am a real Seiko whore, aren't I? So, oof. For now, I'm going to keep both. I might do that comparison and then, yeah, I'll make a decision in a few months as to whether or not I'm going to keep one, two, maybe sell them both. Right, guys, as always, a massive thank you from me to you for tuning in. I do appreciate it. Of course, I'm wrapping things up by showing you the lume degrading after I've done the quick legibility test. Let me know what you think of the watch and the review. As always, thanks for watching. Cheers, guys.